This episode contains mentions of violence and sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised.
If you think you can predict Mike Tyson, you've got a bad crystal ball.
One of the great powers of heavyweight history, ladies and gentlemen, introducing Iron Mike Tyson.
June 1997, Tyson vs. Holyfield, a heavyweight title rematch, the most anticipated fight of the decade.
Mike was the biggest attraction in the modern history of the sport. Clearly, anything could happen in a Tyson fight, and it did happen.
But still, nothing could have prepared us for what happened next.
Mike Tyson biting Holyfield in the right ear.
I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Holy shit, dude got bit.
Mike just chomped on Evander's ear.
I think even if you could see it really clearly from ringside, you wouldn't have believed it.
Mike Tyson had just bitten off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear. The bout would be remembered infamously, known as the bite fight.
It'll go down as one of the craziest nights in the history of boxing or in the history of sports.
This just added to the mystique, the lore, and the despise of Mike Tyson.
To the world, he was a man beyond explanation. So nobody really ever asked the most interesting question. Why? Why did Mike Tyson bite an ear off?
This seems so against the values of boxing, and this was a boxer who so admired them and venerated them historically that none of this made sense.
And also, whatever happened to that piece of ear? Evander Holyfield never got it back, and rumors of the ear's disappearance would alter the course of one man's life.
It was a skin heist. It's not like this thing can get up and walk away. Like, holy Christ, that's Holyfield's ear.
I'm Ben Baskin, and this is Lost in Sports, from Religion of Sports and PRX. I'll take on some of the biggest questions in sports, and some you never thought to ask. Every episode will explore the mysteries of the lost, the forgotten, and the disappeared. And we'll go on a quest for answers. Today, Holyfield's ear. Movies, music, celebrities making bad choices. Crooked Media's weekly podcast, Keep It, has it all. Each week, hosts Ira Madison III, Louis Vertel, and Aida Osman are joined by comedians, actors, musicians, artists, activists, and more to discuss the latest ways pop culture and entertainment have intersected with politics and society. Expect fun guests, award show grievances, and plenty of shade. Guests have included Kristen Bell, Desus and Mero, Mandy Moore, Angela Bassett, Catherine O'Hara, and so many more. New episodes of Keep It drop every Wednesday. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Lost in Sports is brought to you by Progressive. Have you tried the Name Your Price tool yet? It works just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. It's easy to start a quote, and you'll be able to find a rate that works for you. It's just one of many ways you can save with Progressive. Get your quote today at Progressive.com and see why 4 out of 5 new auto customers recommend Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Lost in Sports is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. These days, between work and your personal life and the 24-hour news cycle, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. But maintaining your mental health can't be overlooked. Life can be hard. BetterHelp wants to make asking for help easier. For anyone struggling with depression, addiction, stress, grief, and many other issues, online therapy might be for you. BetterHelp is secure, customized therapy via video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your own licensed therapist. It's convenient and more affordable than in-person therapy, and our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lostinsports. That's betterhelp.com/lostinsports. In the moments after the bite fight, a low-level employee at the MGM Grand named Mitch Libinati found the piece of Evander Holyfield's ear in the ring. And Mitch became a part of the story, interviewed by newspaper writers around the country. He even got the chance to tell his tale on David Letterman.
When I showed up, I said to the handlers of the team,
I have something of Evander Holyfield's. Evander needs this. So
Evander needs this.
He does.
But that story would soon be disputed, because as you can tell by the still missing chunk of flesh on the side of his face, the piece never made it to Holyfield. And many started to look at Mitch and wonder. Some accused him of losing it, or even stealing it. 2+ decades later, it was really hard for me to find Mitch. He wasn't listed, wasn't on social media, and hadn't been in the news since that time. But eventually, I found his brother and sent him a message. And then, a few days later... Hi, this is Ben.
Ben, Mitch Limonati.
Hey, Mitch. You're a hard guy to track down.
As they would say 20-something years ago, just lend me your ears. What's going on? What are you guys up to?
So, I told him. I wanted to find out what really happened that night. Turns out, so did Mitch. So we set up a time for an interview, and Mitch told me his story.
Well, I was born in Thousand Oaks, California, kind of a beach kid, and of course I got hooked on the boxing game.
Mitch loved boxing so much that in 1993, as a 25-year-old with big dreams, he moved to Las Vegas. He wanted to open a gym and train fighters, so he took a job as a porter at the MGM, pretty much a casino janitor, thinking that all he needed was a foot in the door.
It's a lot like those old, those great Italian movies where you get me in and I'm going to move around. We're going to shake things up.
Mitch would soon move up. He became an MGM Grand glove cutter, and Mitch loved the new job. It got him inside the boxing arena.
My job was to make sure that on fight night, the dressing rooms, the boxing ring, everything was perfect. I took so much pride in all of it because I was in the fight game.
Mitch operated with the premise that if you're going to do a job, you do it right. And after the bite fight, Mitch felt he had done just that.
But you did your part.
I did my part.
You did your part.
I'm
Well, I hope this somehow changes your life a bit for the better, at least temporarily, I
Well,
suppose.
I
You get a
hope
little
so.
attention.
Of course, it wouldn't.
I'm telling the story that I returned the ear, but not too many days after that, it was lost. And I'm thinking, how'd they lose it if I gave it to them? They had it in the ambulance, but where did it go from the ambulance to the hospital?
Mitch still swears that he brought it to Evander, despite the accusations.
I know what I did. I delivered it. Fuck you. Why would I even do anything stupid enough if I'm trying to be somebody in the game, let's say? I was passionate about the sport.
After the rumors swirled, Mitch quit the job that he loved. And nearly 25 years later, he's still never figured out what actually happened to the piece of ear. So I knew what I had to do. Solve this mystery once and for all. But to fully answer the question of what really happened that night, first I had to do the impossible. Try to understand what was going on in Mike Tyson's head that had him bite off an ear. But he declined to talk to me. So I had to piece it together myself. And to do that, I had to go back to the beginning.
I put away 1 or 2 bananas, not being selfish, but I'd like to have 1 or 2. And one day I reach up there, I'm like, where the hell did my banana go?
That's Tom Patty, an amateur boxing champion. He was 18 in 1982 when he moved into legendary trainer Cus D'Amato's Catskills home and met Mike Tyson, the 15-year-old kid who just stole his bananas.
Mike's inside watching TV. I went inside and I was not happy about it. I go in there and say, what's the matter with you? I said, you think everything in this house is for you?
But a couple hours later, Patty was surprised to see an entire bunch of bananas waiting for him in his room. To Patty, this is the dichotomy that Mike is always fighting. An unforgiving past that taught him if you see something, you take it, but wanting, trying to be better.
When you grow up in a threatening and hostile environment, you become very narcissistic. The world around you is very threatening and you're really looking out for yourself because nobody else is. It's really self-preservation.
Tyson's life before he moved has been well documented. He grew up in Brownsville, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Brooklyn, with a single mother who at times reportedly resorted to sex work to provide for her family. He was introduced to liquor and drugs as a preteen and spent years running with various gangs.
By the time I was 12 years old, I was arrested over 38 times. The juvenile detention center was like Cheers. There, everybody knew my name.
He broke into houses, stole necklaces right off the necks of people on the subway, and pretended to help elderly women with their groceries, but then took off with their purses.
Most people that come from his neighborhood are either dead or locked up forever. Not many of them make it out of that neighborhood. Not many of them make it into success.
By the time he was 13, the state of New York had sent Tyson to a school for juvenile offenders. It was there that a counselor discovered his natural talent for boxing and called up Cus D'Amato. Cus was now in his 70s, but had worked with champions from Floyd Patterson to Jose Torres. And after watching Mike fight, Cus invited him to train and eventually live in his house upstate, a boxing Shangri-La.
Great big giant Victorian home, 3 stories, overlooking the Hudson River. You didn't go up there just to hang out. You really were living in a boxing environment. We trained 7 days a week.
For Mike, it was like entering into a new world. And at first, it was difficult for him to leave his old one behind. He's admitted that when he arrived, he thought about robbing Cus. But Tyson was practically raised by the old trainer and his partner Camille. And Cus became a father figure, the first man who believed in Mike, and told him that he'd one day be a champion. And so Mike became a serious student of the sport.
Boxing for Mike was the only possibility for redemption, identity, and a future. I mean, he'd watch fight films every day, 2:30, 3 or 4 in the morning. I'd hear Mike practicing the skills that Cus was teaching us as he lived in the floor above me.
He devoured books on boxing history and worked harder than anyone.
When he ran hard. When he trained hard. Crack. Every time he hit, whether it be a bag or a pad or anything, you saw there was explosive energy and speed, power, force. Then you couple that with intent and purpose. You've got some really important ingredients that will lead to success.
But Cus was not your typical trainer. He sent Tyson to a hypnotherapist. And when Mike was under hypnosis, the therapist would recite things like, "You're the world's greatest fighter. This is what you were born to do." Cus told Mike that he was a god of war, the baddest man on the planet, and that no one could stop him. Mike would later say that while the teachings gave him a sense of worth, they also kind of messed with his head.
This is what this old Italian man kept saying to me. He fucked me up. You know what I mean? That's why I got in all this trouble. I thought I was a fucking god.
But Tyson became his best pupil, molded himself into Cus's ideal fighter. He was brutal and unrelenting, but also calculated and composed. A fighter who was able to turn his rage into a controlled fury in the ring. And in 1985, at just 18 years old, Tyson exploded onto the boxing scene. He fought 15 times in his first year as a professional. All wins, all knockouts.
Recently, he's been victorious only by forfeit. It seems that no amateur heavyweight wants to get into the ring with Mike Tyson.
There was a snowball effect, and his reputation grew, and he became known as this murderous puncher who would scare them before the opening bell sounded and then knock them out inside of a round.
That's Steve Farhood, a Hall of Fame boxing historian who has covered Tyson for decades. He says that at that time, in the mid-'80s, fight fans were starved for the next great heavyweight champion. No boxer had captured the nation's attention since Muhammad Ali. But then came Mike Tyson.
In a world of hard punchers, Tyson's punch is devastating. It's been likened to a blackjack and a sledgehammer by foes who have found it impossible to either avoid or withstand.
Everybody wants their heavyweight to be the baddest man on the planet. And every once in a while, maybe once a generation, we get that fighter. And Mike Tyson was that fighter for that generation. He was the baddest man on the planet.
But Tyson was not Ali, not even close. He wasn't pretty or witty. He didn't dance in the ring or recite poems out of it. He was something else entirely.
Mike Tyson was sold as a commodity, and the commodity was destruction.
That's Jim Gray, a Hall of Fame boxing sportscaster who has known Tyson since the fighter was a teenager.
No one is attracted to calm. Everybody wants to see a hurricane. They wanted to see this man come in and inflict this damage, and could he do it again, and again, and again.
And in 1986, at 20 years old, Tyson became the youngest heavyweight ever to win the world title.
The winner by a TKO and youngest and new WBC heavyweight champion of the world, Michael Tyson.
It looked like Tyson was thriving, in the ring and out, and the media celebrated him, ate up his story of redemption. But shortly before he became champion, His trainer and mentor, Cus D'Amato, had died. The one man who always believed Tyson could be better was gone, and his old habits, the callousness and emotional detachment, began to resurface. But Jim Gray says that at first, no one seemed to care.
Everybody was just coming to see, could he connect with that vicious punch and put another guy on the canvas. Anything else that was going on, I don't want to say it was ignored, but it wasn't in the forefront until that interview with Barbara Walters and Robin Givens.
In '88, at the height of his career and his fame, Tyson married the actress Robin Givens. But their marriage quickly and publicly deteriorated, and the two sat side by side for a now notorious national TV interview.
I'm Barbara Walters, and this is 2020.
This is when everything changed for Tyson.
He gets out of control.
Does he hit you?
He shakes, he pushes, he swings. Sometimes I think he's trying to scare me.
After this interview, Givens filed for divorce a week later, and the public's perception of Tyson took a sharp turn. He was no longer considered redeemed or rehabilitated, no longer accepted as a hero, and he began to spiral. He cut ties with his trainer and his manager, got into street fights, car accidents, and scuffles with cameramen.
But people happen to say, well, he's doing this and that, and they make a big three-ring circus out of the situation. But basically, I'm going to live the way I want to live anyway.
But while the public no longer admired Mike Tyson, they were still captivated by him. And boxing promoter Don King, well, he saw an opportunity.
Don King is the smartest man I've ever seen in boxing in my 43 years.
Don knows how to make money, Don knows how to steal money, and Don knows how to keep money from fighters.
He knew that once Cus D'Amato was gone, he could wiggle his way into having a say in Mike Tyson's career.
King replaced what was left of Tyson's original team with cronies who enabled Mike's worst impulses. The discipline that Cus taught him receded further into the past, and in 1990, he lost his heavyweight title to Buster Douglas.
It's over. It's over. Mike Tyson has been knocked out. Let's go ahead and call it the biggest upset in the history of heavyweight championship fights. Say it now, gentlemen.
2 years later, rock bottom. Tyson was convicted of raping an 18-year-old woman and sentenced to 6 years in prison. When he was locked up, he sent Jim Gray a letter professing his innocence. But it was something else that stuck with Jim.
Next paragraph. However, there are 4 or 5 other things that I've done throughout the course of my life that are worse than what I'm accused of. Therefore, I feel I'm at the right place at this time.
In prison, Tyson converted to Islam, read books by Voltaire, Maya Angelou, and Machiavelli. His friends hoped that his time behind bars would allow him to get his life back on track. One told me that he visited Mike in prison multiple times, and each time begged Mike not to go back to Don King after he got out. But when Tyson was released after 3 years for good behavior, there was Don King ushering him into a limo.
Then Mike Tyson emerged, surrounded by bodyguards, his promoter Don King behind him. Seldom can a prisoner have emerged from here into a stretch limousine.
Tyson was now the most controversial athlete in sports.
He's a common criminal who's getting what he deserves.
He's a rapist. He belongs in jail.
He's finished, washed up. He's a thug.
You know, he had been in prison for 3 years. He was one of the most hated athletes in sports. Coming out, there was no one cheering for him.
That's Richard Hoffer, a former Sports Illustrated boxing writer and the author of the Tyson biography, A Savage Business. During these years, Hoffer was covering the fighter closer than anyone, and he remembers how, despite that hatred, the world was fascinated to see if Tyson could reclaim his place in boxing. So Don King orchestrated a Mike Tyson comeback tour, of sorts. He had Tyson fight a string of no-name boxers, making $20 million or more a fight.
We had some of the most ridiculous matches in the history of boxing in this comeback. A parade of incompetency. You know, it was hard to even tell how good Mike Tyson was against this backdrop of foolishness.
Don King's promotion centered around Tyson's release from prison. His first fight was billed with the headline, "He's back."
I mean, he was being cast as the villain in all of these things. That was the whole point of the promotion, is that here's this guy who came out of prison after raping a teenager, and you know, our revulsion mixed with fascination was going to make him rich. Well, that's not a proposition that's, you know, particularly ennobling if you're that guy.
Mike Tyson has an appalling history of violence against women. This is not the man who should be held out as a role model.
At this time, Hoffer remembers how Mike was often melancholy and bitter, constantly talking about how he was alone, how no one cared about him. It seemed like Tyson felt that everything he worked for with Cus D'Amato, everything he was trying to become, was slipping away. But Don King was making a lot of money, and he knew that all they needed now was the perfect foil for the perfect villain.
Representing his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, Evander, the real deal, Holyfield.
Nobody thought Evander could beat Mike Tyson. Nobody did.
That's Tim Hallmark, Evander Holyfield's former conditioning coach.
You know, he wasn't big enough. He wasn't strong enough. He wasn't a legitimate heavyweight. He was groomed to be the underdog and win.
Holyfield was a former champion and one of the most cherished fighters of his generation, and he had wanted a shot at Tyson for years. They first met back in '84 at training camp before the Olympic trials. Holyfield was 21 and Tyson 17. The story goes that Tyson was brutalizing his sparring opponents, and no one wanted to get in the ring with him. But Holyfield volunteered.
So Mike looked at me and said, "Man, you good." Ever since that day, he bothered everybody else, but it didn't bother me.
But by the mid-90s, his prime was long past. And in '96, when he fought long shot Bobby Ches, he looked washed up.
George, you see Evander running out of steam a little bit? To me, he's looking like, I'm scared to say it, an old fighter.
He won the fight, but he was really criticized at how poorly he fought. And I said, but I'll bet you Tyson's people reach out to you now because they think you're on the downside of your career.
Tyson was knocking out unknown fighter after unknown fighter, and even won one of his heavyweight title belts back. But it was becoming clear that Tyson needed opponents that fans had actually heard of. He needed Evander Holyfield.
3 days later, he called me back and said, Hallmark, Tyson's people called and you were right. They want to fight.
But Holyfield's former manager was begging him to retire. Don King even reportedly said that Evander had one foot in the graveyard.
People were asking us, why are you sending him to the death chamber, you know?
That's Tommy Brooks, one of Holyfield's boxing trainers. Like Hallmark, he initially wasn't worried, but that changed when he watched Holyfield spar one day during training.
I called him over. I said, look, man, you know, we got to talk. And he would say, hey, listen, man, don't worry about that. I work with Mike Tyson as an amateur. I whooped his ass then, I'm going to whoop his ass again. And that's all I needed to hear.
Holyfield was the seeming opposite of Mike Tyson, soft-spoken, pious, and humble. And when the two squared off for the heavyweight title in November of 1996, the fight was framed as good versus evil, hero versus villain. And Tyson was a massive favorite. But historian Steve Farhood, who was sitting ringside, knew immediately that Tyson was in for a long night.
There was a sign, literally in the first 5 or 6 seconds, where Tyson hit Holyfield with a big shot.
A straight right hand by Tyson that landed.
And Holyfield took it, didn't flinch, didn't blink.
He's not moving Holyfield back.
That was a quick sign of the fact that this was not maybe going to go the way we thought it was going to go.
As the fight went on, Tyson appeared to grow more and more frustrated. Holyfield was relentlessly chasing him around the ring. And in the 6th round, the two fighters' heads clashed, opening a cut under Tyson's right eye. But the headbutt was deemed accidental.
Accidental headbutt.
Just over a minute after the fight resumed, Holyfield knocked Tyson down, just the second fighter ever to do so.
Evander was on him like stank on shit. There was nowhere for Mike to go but down.
I'll tell you what, a lot of people, including myself, didn't think Holyfield could slug him like this.
And in the 11th round, the ref stopped the fight.
The Topper stops the fight, and Holyfield has
I can't believe what I'm seeing. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever been privileged to witness.
For Holyfield, the win was a massive surprise. But for Tyson, it wasn't just a loss. It was embarrassing.
Mike didn't expect any of that. It's kind of like a guy going to a gunfight with a knife. He didn't have any idea that Evander was going to be able to do what he did.
When you're a 25-1 favorite, yeah, that's very damaging to one's ego and one's self-awareness.
So of course a rematch was scheduled. Mike's old housemate, Tom Patty, says Tyson didn't take Evander seriously in the first fight, so he didn't train very hard. But for the rematch, Patty flew out to help his friend prepare and remind him of the teachings of their shared mentor, Cus D'Amato. This time, Patty says Tyson worked his ass off.
The difference in this fight is there was an intensity. Mike was training. Mike was focused. Mike wanted to win again. He was set on redemption.
If he beats me this time, he beats me the best I've ever been. I could have never beaten him if he beats me this time.
With the chance to win his heavyweight belt back, the odds makers again picked Tyson as the favorite. And on June 28, 1997, 16,000 people packed into the MGM Grand for the rematch. It was the highest grossing fight in boxing history, televised in 98 countries.
The night of the second fight was magnified compared to the first fight. It was almost like the whole atmosphere in the air was thicker.
There was a bloodlust that had been aroused. The crowd was on their feet from the beginning, sensing they were going to see something concussive, something spectacular, something cruel.
You get half the crowd there to see talent, and then you got half the crowd to want to see a murder, you know what I mean?
It is a showtime!
Leading up to the fight, Tyson had complained so much about the illegal headbutts he felt had been ignored that the referee from the first fight withdrew from the rematch. But almost as soon as the bout began, it was clear that the referee wasn't the problem.
Our whole team realized that Vander was thundering on him. It was going to be the same thing all over with.
The first 2 rounds looked nearly the same as the first fight.
And he got Mike on the heels. Got him on his heels. Mike's not going forward.
Holyfield was pushing Tyson around the ring, landing counter punches and taking Mike's best shots without flinching.
Evander Holyfield makes his point in the first round.
I wonder what that did to Tyson's confidence.
Again, both men charged straight towards each other, like a game of chicken on repeat, their heads constantly clashing.
Lo and behold, there was a headbutt which opened a gash over his right eye, just a huge gash.
He looks over to Mills Lane. It's a cut around the right eye of Mike Tyson from a clash of heads, I believe.
That's a butt.
Deja vu.
It's the only time that I had seen in my life another man's skull that wasn't in biology class.
With blood rushing into his eyes, Tyson kept looking pleadingly towards the referee, pointing out the gash on his face. But just like last time, the referee did nothing.
And that seemed to totally derail him, both physically and psychologically. It's as if a switch went off in his head. He wanted to brawl when he had spent an entire career being taught how to fight.
And Tyson really beginning to look frustrated now.
He was in a situation where nothing was working for him. Nothing. And I think Mike decided, you know what? I don't want to do this.
When you corner a rat, he's going to do anything he can to get out of that corner.
And with 41 seconds left in the third round, Tyson pulled Holyfield into a clinch. And that's when things got weird.
Oh my goodness, he's got a bloody right ear. Holyfield bit by a dirty Mike Tyson.
Evander was holding his ear and said, he bit me. All I can remember is Evander jumping up and doing a 360, holding his ear.
Evander explodes out.
Jumping up like on a pogo stick, twirling around. It was as if he had been stung by a bee.
With a look on his face like, I can't believe that just happened.
The ref stopped the fight for a few minutes as he tried to figure out what had just happened. Boxing has seen its share of shameful acts and dirty antics, but no one had ever bitten an ear. Everyone in the arena was confused, and amid all that confusion, no one noticed the small piece of ear that was now sitting in the ring. Soon, the ringside doctor declared that Holyfield was able to continue fighting, so the ref simply deducted 2 points from Tyson and said the bout would go on, even though Holyfield was now missing some of his ear.
When Evander came back to the corner, he said, man, give me my mouthpiece. I'm going to whoop his ass now.
The two fighters returned to the center of the ring and the fight resumed. But within seconds, Tyson leaned in again and bit the other ear. This time, the referee stopped the fight. Tyson was disqualified, and he went ballistic. He tried to fight everyone, trainers and coaches, announcers, and even cops.
It is complete bedlam, and Tyson is just taking swipes at anybody in front of him.
I still got the picture in my mind of the way Mike was just clearing people out around him. And I'm thinking to myself, what's this sucker fixing to do next?
Eventually, the ring was cleared, and the fighters went back to their locker rooms. But the chaos spread as fights broke out in the stands and in the casino, Tables got overturned, gunshots were reported, and people started stealing trays of poker chips. But back in the arena, much to Jim Gray's surprise, Mike Tyson appeared for their post-fight interview.
Name one other person in professional sports who would do a horrible act like that and then stand there and do the interview.
Was that a retaliation for the eye when you bit him in his ear?
Regardless of what I did, he bit me for 2 fights.
But you got to address it, Mike.
I did address it. I addressed it in the ring.
Why did you do that, though, Mike? I mean, was that the proper response?
Look at me.
Mike did what he needed to do to retaliate against somebody that was doing something very bad to him.
That's Tom Patty again, Mike's old friend.
Mike said to me, nobody looked out for me in my first fight, and nobody looked out for me in the second fight when it happened. So Mike retaliated.
Remember, Mike had been cast as the villain. He thought everyone was against him, including his own team, and he believed that for him, redemption was only possible in the ring. But with Holyfield, he found a fighter he couldn't bully and couldn't beat, and he didn't know how to handle it. He had been taught that no one could stop him, so he snapped. But again, why did he bite him? Why not headbutt him back, or elbow, or tackle him? Well, it turns out Tyson may have gotten his inspiration from Tom Patty. Remember, Tom was one of Mike's oldest friends, a trusted Cus D'Amato disciple, and had helped Mike prepare for the rematch. And just a few days before the fight, the two were talking.
So he asked me, he says, you think you'd be able to do time? I said, the first thing I'd do is I'd pull an Artie Diamond.
Artie Diamond was a small Jewish welterweight who fought in the 1940s and 50s. He was also trained by Cus D'Amato and was known to most as the toughest SOB who ever lived.
He would get in the ring and he would just destroy with reckless abandonment, and he was just savage.
Artie was arrested for shooting a guard during a robbery and was sent to prison. And on his first day there, a crowd gathered in the prison yard to watch Artie fight the biggest guy in the joint. They all wanted to see him get pummeled and embarrassed.
And Artie's, kind of mumbling. He just basically suckers the guy to lean in, and he whispers in his ear. And instead of saying something, he bites a big chunk of the guy's ear off. And he becomes the new top guy for the 8, 10, 12 years or so that he was there.
That's the story that Tom Patty told Mike Tyson just days before Mike bit Evander Holyfield's ear off. About the toughest guy in the world, a man who had lost everything, who was cornered and out of options, with an audience watching and waiting for him to be humiliated. And so that man, Artie Diamond, bit a man's ear off and became the baddest man in the prison. Years later, Patty would ask Mike if he was partly responsible.
I gotta ask you, man, it's on my mind. I said, did I help alter the history of boxing here? He puts his hand on my shoulder, he says, Tommy, I don't know. I just did the first thing that came to my mind. He goes, I don't know if it was you or not, but I did it.
So, not even Mike Tyson knows exactly why he did it. But the circumstances are so similar that it's pretty hard to believe it's just a coincidence. So in my book, that's a mystery solved. But I still had one more question. What happened after the bite? What really happened to that piece of ear?
For me, going into, another fight weekend, I was like, oh, I can't wait for this.
Before he'd find the ear and then be accused of stealing it, MGM employee Mitch Libinati was excited for the fight. He arrived at the arena early to make sure everything was perfect.
Hanging up the advertisement, straightening the bumper pads, checking the canvas, making sure it's clean. I would take a lot of the water, towels, soiled blood, whatever was from prior fights. So I was just doing my job, maintaining the appearance of the ring.
As the fight grew near, Mitch settled into his usual spot behind Holyfield's corner. Standing no more than 20 feet away, leaning against a barrier on the south side of the ring, was a man Mitch has never met, but would be forever connected with.
My name is Brian Rogers. I'm a nationally registered paramedic.
3 men's lives would be intertwined that night around the missing ear. 3 men who met only and shared rumors of blame and impropriety. Mitch was one. Brian, I had learned, was another.
If you read the stories, everybody said that a paramedic lost Evander's ear and they couldn't sew it back on. Well, if it was a paramedic, I would be that paramedic.
In the 90s, Brian Rogers worked for Mercy Ambulance as the director of special events. He had worked hundreds of fights, concerts, and shows in Las Vegas. And at first, this night was business as usual for Brian. But then...
all of a sudden, something crazy happened. Mike just chomped on Evander's ear. I think being a fan is tempered by, now I got work to do.
Brian had to go into the fighters' locker rooms for a mandatory post-fight health check. When he entered Holyfield's, he saw the fighter leading the room in a prayer of forgiveness for Mike Tyson. Meanwhile, back in the boxing ring, Mitch was diligently cleaning up the mess when he looked down and saw it.
It was right below my feet. It just looked like just a piece of little rubber.
It wasn't a piece of rubber. It was a piece of Holyfield's ear.
Immediate thought is, I got to get this to Evander. I picked it up with my latex gloves on, put it inside another latex glove, and asked for help to get to that dressing room.
With an escort from security, Mitch fought his way through the unruly crowd and made it to Evander's locker room.
When I knocked on that door, it was one of those things where they just looked at me like, you kidding? You know, what's this kid want? And I told him, I have the piece. It's in this latex glove.
Mitch handed over the glove to the ringside physician, a guy by the name of Flip Hamansky. And Flip took the glove, placed it in a plastic bag with ice, and gave it to the paramedic in the room.
Flip handed me a bag within a bag, and in between the bags there was ice. And it was closed. And Flip said, the ear is in here. I'm like, okay. I never opened this bag. Not once.
Evander was taken out of the arena on a stretcher and put in an ambulance. The paramedic, Brian Rogers, joined him on the ride, and the bag with the piece of ear sat safely next to Brian the whole time. When they arrived at the hospital, Evander was taken into surgery, and Brian met a team of nurses waiting outside.
You know, I handed him a red bag, and I said, the ear is in here. Boom. I'm done.
Here is where the third and final man in this ear saga enters. He's a plastic surgeon named Julio Garcia, and earlier that night, he was at a friend's party enjoying the fight.
Dude, I was having the greatest time because, of course, you see the fight, you see the bite, you go, oh my God, everyone's just going, this is crazy. I turned to my, guy who was throwing the party, and I looked at him and I said, some idiot's going to have to go and sew this guy up now. I can't believe this.
Little did he know, that idiot would be him.
The beeper goes off, I see the number, so I pick up my gray phone with the long antenna, and I said, what's up, Al? And he says, hey, we need you down here right away.
Dr. Garcia managed to get to the hospital in about 15 minutes. When he walked inside,
there was a nurse waiting for me at the counter saying, hey, Dr. Garcia, someone was able to retrieve the skin with some ice, and we've got it on hold here for you. Once I saw the skin, it was like I took almost like a sigh of relief, like, oh man, this is easy. Just a piece of skin, like if you were taking a piece of chicken skin off a chicken breast, that's what I had, basically a piece of folding over skin.
The doc then put the bag down and scrubbed in for surgery.
When I change and come out in a minute and a half in my scrubs, and I look and it's gone, and I go grab the nurse, I go, where is the skin? She goes, where do you mean, where's the skin? And I said, well, it's missing. And she's like, how can it be missing? I said, I don't know. So I'm asking her, I go, what are we going to do?
He had taken his eyes off the bag for no more than 90 seconds, but it was gone.
I was just scared crapless. 33 years of practice in plastic surgery in Las Vegas. That was the one and only time that human body parts went missing on me.
Dr. Garcia doesn't know for sure what happened, but he thinks there's only one option.
It was a skin heist, probably. Some worker heard that we had it, and they figured they would be able to make some money, so they took the skin and they kept it, thinking that they would be able to pawn it off. It's not like this thing can get up and walk away, right?
Apparently, no one went through the security footage to find the culprit. At the time, Dr. Garcia was more concerned with the surgery. All he could do without the skin was clean the ear and sew it up, which he did. And Holyfield didn't seem to mind that he was still missing a chunk of flesh.
So he comes out like most boxers, they're bouncing, left, right, kind of throwing tiny punches. And he goes, hey, doc, look at me. I look like a Doberman Pinscher. And I started laughing so hard because here's this guy who just went through this fight and he's cracking jokes. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This guy is like superhuman.
Dr. Garcia would then drive home and go to sleep. But then...
Phone went off about 3 o'clock in the morning or so. Hey, can I speak to Dr. Garcia? That's me. And they said, hey, I've got the cartilage from the bite. Do you need it?
On the phone was someone from the MGM's overnight cleaning crew, who had apparently found another piece of ear.
And I said, no, I can't use it anymore, buddy, because it's all dirty and I can't put it on another human. And anyway, Evander's already gone. Why don't you just go ahead and see if you can find someone that wants it? Rumor has it that that piece of cartilage was subsequently sold at auction in New York City for $25,000.
I found no evidence that this sale happened, and no proof that it didn't. But here's what we do know. After the fight, Mitch Libinati, the MGM employee in charge of cleaning the ring, had found the piece of skin, which paramedic Brian Rogers then brought to the hospital, where the possible skin heist happened. This phone call Dr. Garcia received at 3 in the morning was about a piece of cartilage that was also found much later that night. But Mitch didn't know about the second piece of ear. No one I spoke with did. It wasn't reported anywhere, and those auction rumors followed Mitch around.
There was a rumor out there that a guy had the piece that I found. He was going to sell it for anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. That was a complete joke, but it also led to a lot of my insecurities that, somebody out there thinking I'm, selling ears.
Mitch only cared about doing his job, but when he returned to work, he felt like everyone at the MGM was now staring at him. And so Mitch Libinati, a man who loved boxing, who wanted to be in the fight game more than anything, quit and never worked in boxing again.
I was getting maybe looked at, there's the guy that found the ear, there's the guy that found the ear, that kind of thing. It sounds stupid, but I didn't like it and never went to a fight after that.
And while Brian didn't take the rumors very seriously, he had to live with this too.
For a little while, they were mad at me. They think I got the guy's ear. And I'm like, I don't got nobody's ear. You're all crazy. Okay, I was given a bag and told to give it to you. That's what I did. I said, why do you think I would keep Evander Holyfield's ear? I think it was Sports Illustrated that said someday at a paramedics picnic, they're going to open a cooler and find an ear. And I'm like, man, that's screwed up.
Neither man had ever heard the story about Dr. Garcia and the potential skin heist and the phone call and the second piece of ear. Until I told them.
All of what you just said relieves me of many years of that insecurity. I did my job, and it made it to the hospital. That's like a 3-pointer for me, man.
Wow. Now you're telling me something I had no idea.
Solve some mysteries for you. That's what we're trying to do on this show.
Well, at least that absolves me.
Of course, it doesn't absolve Mike Tyson. After the bite fight, Tyson was suspended from boxing for over a year. And his life spiraled. Stories about kicking Don King in the head, wild drug benders, and that face tattoo. His interviews in the final years of his career were a mix of poetry and insanity.
My style is impetuous, my defense is impregnable, and I'm just ferocious. I want your heart, I want to eat his children.
That's right, eat his children. And after he retired in 2005, the descent only escalated. There were arrests and multiple stints in rehab.
Police arrested the 40-year-old former heavyweight after he nearly rammed a police car. The arresting officer said Tyson appeared to be impaired and wiped white powder off the console of his BMW as the officer approached.
For years, his friends were waiting for the dreaded phone call that Tyson was dead. But at some point after he married his current wife, Kiki, in 2009, he seems to have turned his life around. That's the same year he made his famous cameo in the first Hangover movie and was celebrated again in pop culture.
Don't make me come back for him.
That was Mike Tyson.
Yeah, no shit, that was Mike Tyson.
I'm just saying, he still got it.
To me, Tyson is still one of the most interesting people in sports history. I've never really known how to feel about him, rotating between appreciation, fascination, and disgust. Again, Tyson declined to participate in this story. So instead, I had to ask his friends, like Tom Patty, how he should be viewed today.
When you think about Mike and his image and Iron Mike, he was just untouchable. He was unstoppable. He was just forced to be reckoned with. But you know what? He's a human. He's a human being, flawed like we all are. in spite of his challenges, in spite of those adversities, he's still standing. He's still on his own 2 feet, and he's still bearing the burden and the weight of high expectations.
There are no rules governing forgiveness, no universal arbiter that decides if and when someone should be considered redeemed. But countless athletes and celebrities have been blacklisted for crimes far less than what Tyson has been accused of, convicted of, even admitted to. But he's somewhat shockingly been embraced again by society. He's returned to fight in exhibition matches, has sponsorship deals, TV shows, commercials. He even hosts a popular podcast where he bares his soul and shares wisdom.
When you're favored by God, you're also favored by the devil. So you just gotta be strong and stay on the right side. Whose side you gonna go on? He's gonna give you power too.
I don't know that anybody thought, including Mike Tyson, that he would be alive. He's often said he never thought he would live this long.
That's Jim Gray again. Over the decades of covering Tyson, the two have become close friends.
Nothing is predictable with Mike. Now, a lot of that has been the fun and the beauty of him in the ring, that unpredictability. But it's also led to a lot of despicable things that he's done in his life. And clearly he's made a lot of mistakes. And even though he's on this roller coaster and you never know what's next, at least he's making an attempt to be better tomorrow than he was today and yesterday.
Tyson says he's changed, grown, and he credits medication, both pharmaceutical and homegrown, for his transformation.
I was too into that character, that Iron Mike guy, and that guy was pretty toxic for me at that particular time. He had overstayed his welcome.
His friends say he has changed and continues to. But of course, it's not that simple. Jim Gray actually interviewed Mike while I was working on this story, and he asked him if he had any regrets about biting Evander's ear.
He said his regret was that he didn't have control, that he lost control. But he did not regret doing it, and he would do it again, he said, if Holyfield continued to butt him.
After all, Mike Tyson is still Mike Tyson, a man of contradictions, impossible to predict or explain. His friends say he's still fighting that dichotomy between who he was and who he wants to be.
Well, Mike's incomparable. Who could have lived this life in this fashion? I don't know of anyone. I really don't.
So all I know for sure is that there will never be another Mike Tyson. On the next episode of Lost in Sports.
Who could ever believe there'd be a professional franchise of any kind in the state of Connecticut?
It broke my heart to see them leave. It was a death in the family.
It's like going to a funeral without a body.
This episode was written and reported by me, Ben Baskin. Our senior producer is Kate McAuliffe. Iggy Monda is our production assistant, with production support from Megan Coyle and Devin Manzi. Tommy Bazarian from PRX Productions is our engineer. This episode was edited by Jessica Popovac, fact-checking done by Jane Ackerman. Our theme song was composed by Michael Kramer. Our executive producers are Gotham Chopra, Amith Sankaran, and Adam Schlossman. Special thanks to Matt Blank, Joe Cortez, Steve Lott, Evan Michelson, and Billy White. Lost in Sports is a production of Religion of Sports and PRX. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend, tell your chiropractor, tell your mother, and then do me a favor and leave us a review and click follow. And if you have your own sports mysteries you want me to solve, text me or leave me a voicemail at 914-893-2870. Or email me at lostinsports@religionofsports.com.
So what do you do with an ear? I mean, flesh will disintegrate.
No one knows what happened to it.
But I mean, it's not like it's a keepsake of some sort. You can't do anything with it. If you open up someone's grave a month later, it's gone.
It's an enduring mystery.
That's a better podcast than this. Go find it.
From all of us on the Lost in Sports team and the larger ROS family, I wanted to take a moment to thank our launch sponsors, Odoo, Progressive, DraftKings, and BetterHelp Online Counseling, for supporting the show and its creators.
From PRX.